The boy's voice echoed through the courtroom, clear and sharp like a bell. Everyone froze. The judge, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, stopped mid-sentence, her gavel raised in the air. The defense attorney, who had been rifling through papers, turned to look at the boy in disbelief. The prosecutor stood there, his mouth hanging open, as though someone had knocked the wind out of him in the middle of an argument. The boy, small with messy blonde hair and wide blue eyes, stood in the aisle of the courtroom. He looked no older than 10, but his expression was filled with fierce determination. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and his sneakers squeaked slightly as he shifted his weight. "Bailiff," the judge barked, her voice sharp and commanding. "Get that child out of here." But before the bailiff could move, the boy shouted, "You can't throw me out. I know something that will change everything." His voice cracked with emotion, but he didn't waver. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Whispers, gasps, and craning necks filled the air as people tried to figure out who this boy was and what he could possibly know. The judge slammed her gavel down repeatedly, trying to restore order. But her eyes never left the boy, suspicion and curiosity warring in her gaze. "What could you possibly know, son?" she asked finally, her voice quieter but no less stern. "This is a murder trial. You shouldn't even be here." The boy swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. "Because I know who really did it," he said, his voice trembling but steady. "And it wasn't him." He pointed to the defendant, a man sitting in stunned silence at the defense table. The room went silent. The defendant, a middle-aged man with hollow cheeks and tired eyes, stared at the boy as if seeing a ghost. The judge leaned forward slightly, her brows furrowing. "Who are you?" she demanded.
What do you mean by that?
The boy opened his mouth to speak, but before he could answer, the courtroom doors flew open. A man in a dark suit rushed in, his face pale and frantic. "Ethan," he shouted. "What are you doing here?" The boy flinched at the sound of his name, but he didn't turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on the judge. "Please," he whispered. "You have to listen to me." The judge hesitated for a moment, then motioned for the bailiff to approach. "Take him to my chambers," she instructed. "We'll continue this in private. Everyone else, stay seated. This trial isn't over." As the bailiff gently led Ethan out of the courtroom, the boy glanced over his shoulder. His eyes were filled with a mix of fear and determination. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud, leaving the courtroom buzzing with unanswered questions. The story had started long before Ethan ever set foot in that courtroom. He was just an ordinary boy from a small town in Ohio, the type of kid who enjoyed playing baseball with friends and eating too many slices of pizza on Friday nights. But Ethan had a knack for noticing things that most people overlooked. His mom always said he had an old soul, though Ethan wasn't entirely sure what that meant. One summer afternoon, everything changed. Ethan was riding his bike through the park when he spotted a man and a woman arguing near the lake. They were too far for him to hear their words, but their body language was intense. The man kept pointing at the woman, and she kept shaking her head. Something about the scene made Ethan uneasy, so he stopped and watched from behind a tree. A few minutes later, the man grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her toward a nearby car. She resisted, shouting something Ethan couldn't hear. The man looked around, his eyes darting nervously, and then shoved her into the car. Ethan's stomach churned. He wanted to do something but was just a kid. What could he do? He went home and told his mom what he had seen, but she brushed it off. "Probably just a couple having a fight," she said, ruffling his hair. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart." Ethan tried to forget about it, but the scene kept replaying in his mind. A week later, he saw the man's face on the news. His name was Lucas Hart, and he was accused of murdering his girlfriend, Alyssa Green. Her body had been found in the woods near the park, and Lucas was the prime suspect. Ethan's heart sank. He didn't want to believe the man he had seen that day could be a killer, but the evidence seemed overwhelming. Witnesses claimed they had heard Lucas and Alyssa arguing the night she disappeared. His fingerprints were found on her belongings, and he didn't have an alibi. The case became the talk of the town. Everyone was convinced Lucas was guilty, but something about it didn't sit right with Ethan. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Lucas had looked that day in the park, scared, desperate, but not angry. And then there was the woman in the car. Alyssa had long dark hair, but the woman Ethan saw that day was blonde. At first, Ethan kept quiet, afraid no one would believe him. But as the trial approached, the weight of what he knew became too much to bear. He started having nightmares about Alyssa, her face pale and lifeless, asking him why he didn't speak up. He woke up in a cold sweat more nights than he could count. One evening, Ethan was in his room, staring at a news article about the trial on his tablet when he made up his mind. He had to do something, no matter how scared he was. He didn't know how, but he was going to find a way to tell someone what he had seen. Ethan's chance came sooner than he expected. His mom had to go to the courthouse for jury duty, and Ethan begged her to let him come along. "I'll be quiet, I promise," he said, putting on his best puppy dog face. "I just want to see what it's like." His mom hesitated, but eventually gave in.
"All right," she said, "but you have to sit quietly in the back.
No running around. No talking."
Got it?
Ethan nodded eagerly, his heart racing. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew this was his moment. When they got to the courthouse, Ethan's mom handed him a granola bar and a book to keep him occupied. "I'll be in the jury room," she said. "Don't leave this bench, okay?" Ethan nodded again, but as soon as she was out of sight, he made his way to the courtroom where Lucas's trial was being held. He slipped in quietly and found a seat in the back. The room was packed with reporters, lawyers, and spectators, all watching the proceedings with rapt attention. Ethan's heart pounded as he listened to the prosecutor lay out the case against Lucas. The evidence sounded overwhelming, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He was about to leave, unsure of what to do next, when the defense attorney called Lucas to the stand. As Lucas began to testify, Ethan's eyes widened. He recognized the man immediately. It was the same man he had seen in the park that day, but something was different. Lucas looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his voice barely audible. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. What if Lucas wasn't guilty? What if he was being blamed for something he didn't do? The thought hit Ethan like a lightning bolt. He couldn't keep quiet anymore. His legs moved before his brain could catch up, and the next thing he knew, he was standing in the middle of the courtroom, shouting for everyone to stop.